I'm Dr. Deborah Vinall, and I'm here today with my new Substack friend, Dr. Bronce Rice. He is a psychologist on the East Coast somewhere. Where are you exactly?
I'm in New Haven, Connecticut.
New Haven, Connecticut. Oh, Connecticut seems really nice, but I've never been there. And I'm a psychologist out here and licensed marriage and family therapist in Southern California, just outside of Los Angeles.
Okay.
And yeah, originally from Canada, but this is I needed warmth, so I came to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
warmer.
fair. No, I'm from Michigan originally, and I'm like, didn't get that far away temperature-wise. So,
But you got closer to the ocean. We both looked for that.
no, that's true. That is true. It's important. Yeah,
It is, which is actually kind of ties into what we wanted to talk about, which is building blocks for mental health and for resilience. Um, and the reason I say that ties in, but I really want to hear what you have to say on this, Dr. Bronce. Because green spaces and blue spaces, being in nature, being by the ocean, being by rivers and lakes, is actually really, really healthy for our mental health and for building the kind of resilience that helps us protect against anxiety and depression. And so um, that's why I mentioned how interesting we both moved toward the ocean. But before we jump into all of that, Dr. Bronze, would you like to just tell all of our listeners a little bit about yourself and your practice out there in New Haven?
yeah. So I'm a psychologist, psychoanalyst. I do face-to-face therapy once, twice a week with most people. And I've got probably a smaller 10% of my practice where I actually do the old school kind of psychoanalysis where someone lays down on the couch
Oh, yeah.
4 or 5 times a week, depending. Sometimes that's three, a lot of postdocs, graduate students, professors
Mhm.
is probably the bulk of my practice. It's not kind of what I intended to. That's kind of what's happened.
Oh, neat. I love working with college students too. It feels like such a neat time where you're an adult, but so much of life is ahead of you. And it's such a great time to really explore through what formed you and become the person you want to become. So I find it such an exciting time
No,
working with people.
absolutely. Yeah, you can tell kind of with a lot of my graduate students and postdocs. I was like, well, they figured out how to get somewhere by doing it a certain kind of way. But I've found at times it's not always that the healthiest, and so you kind of help them understand, hey, what are they bringing with them from their past? What are they kind of repeating in certain ways? And then, yeah, what would they like to do moving into the future, and kind of help them think about, how you might take some of that with you, but also how you might kind of change your thinking and kind of patterns about moving into the future, a little bit of a healthier way at points. Hey, how
Yeah.
about you? What's your practice consist of?
Well, I focus on trauma therapy. So a
Okay.
lot of PTSD, anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
At this point, I mostly work with adults. That's mostly a scheduling issue for me right now, which is kind of funny because one of my books is actually a trauma. I'll show it to you.
Oh,
Actually,
yeah.
it's a trauma recovery book
Yeah.
for teens. And some people are like, oh, so you work with teens? I'm like, well, sometimes, but also I really love working with adults. This is my trauma book. So
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe
Yeah.
I'll,
Put
I'll
that back up. Put that back up. I want to see that. Let me see that. Nice. All right. There you go. There you go. All right. Nice.
that one came out about 3 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. It's a lot of work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fulfilling. And I know you're working on a book as well, and
Yeah.
doing a lot of writing on Substack where we connected with each other. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your writing and what the focus of your writing is about, and what you're hoping to bring into the world through that?
Yeah. So my writing started during the pandemic.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a time where I no longer was going into the office to see everybody. Kind of more at home, telehealth and in various ways. Um, so I had more and less time on my hands in a certain kind of way. I had patients who I used to see, 4 or 5 years prior, wanting to come back to see me, and I was so booked I couldn't see straight.
Yeah,
People
everybody's
just
just
kept
so
people
anxious.
just kept coming out of the woodwork, and so I had a list of clients that I saw previously. I'd write them down, keep a list, and so try to get them in when I could, but eventually it's like I couldn't see everybody, and so I had to turn people away, and not just people I didn't know. Well, that was fine. I didn't like turning people away I didn't know, but to turn away people who you helped support and care for at points, it was just kind of a weird experience. And so
Mhm.
at that point, I started thinking, well, is there anything else you'd like to do in life in various ways. And I think there was a little voice in my back of my head was like, hey, maybe you'd like to write a book.
Mhm.
My other voice, came back and said, well, you don't know anything about writing a book. And I'm like, no, you don't. But people
Nobody does
do
until they
it.
write it the first time,
People
though.
figure it out. My writing started out of the pandemic, kind of with some kind of like guilt in various ways about having to turn people away that you care about, and thinking, well, how would I help them? And I think, like a lot of people, I was going through my own anxieties with the pandemic and whatnot. And I'm just kind of thinking, well, what do I need? And so
That was
that's
such
kind
a
of how I
bizarre
started
time.
writing. I kind of thought, well, let me write about what I do for a living, how to think about kind of health and wellness,
Mhm.
right? Um, how would I kind of live that out in various ways? How would I talk to people about it? Since they can't come to see me, what would I give them?
Yeah.
Is kind of how I started. And then I just kept writing, and eventually I had like 3 books worth. Right.
Nice.
And then, I sent it to some editor, and they're like, look, you're going to cut this down. This is way too long. So anyway, then also they're like, hey, if you want to see the light of day at some point, you might want to build out a online platform. I'm like, what's an online platform? Like, so anyways, eventually it's how I got to Substack and started to talk about my well-being and other people's well-being. And then I started to think about it like an equation. Like, what goes into it? What are the components? How do you think about it and bring it into existence, live it out? And so that's a little bit about kind of what my book is about, and the journey that got me here to
Mhm.
Substack. How
Yeah,
about
and in
yourself? How
Substack,
did
it's
you
called the well-being
the
equation,
well-being
right? Yeah.
equation? Yeah, and then that's what uh, that's what my book is about, and hopefully will be about. Hopefully to get out in the light of day. You know,
Yeah.
how about you? How did you get started and with the writing, and how did you
You
get to Substack and all that?
Yeah, well, I relate to a lot of what you're saying. It's a different pattern, but a lot of these same themes mixed in there. I also started writing my first book during the pandemic. Um, so there is a lot of that. I think we
Yeah.
used to joke too about like one can like we're all staying home, we're all gonna like write books and we're all gonna bake bread and we're all gonna learn another language. And I kind of did all three of those. I was like, I'm nailing the pandemic. But the reality of it was, it was such a weird time, right? Because normally we may have gone through the same thing as our clients. Some people have gone through addiction and specialize in
Yeah.
addictions. Some people have gone through trauma and specialize in trauma. Like that's me. And some people, and often we bring our own stuff, but we've worked through it. And it's like we're grounded, we're in
Yeah.
a good place. And then we bring that healing to other people. But the pandemic was weird because we were simultaneously all going through it with our clients,
Mhm.
holding space for
Mhm.
people while also worrying about the same things. It was such a bizarre time as a therapist, wasn't it?
Right.
Anyways,
Yeah.
that aside, I kind of got off track. I was just thinking about
Of
that.
course. Yeah.
But so my first book, sorry, another translation there.
I know.
This was my first book, Gaslighting. Oh, there it is.
There you go.
Gaslighting
There
to
you go.
stop myself
Gaslighting.
recovery. I don't know how to
Nice.
like censor myself. There it is.
we're,
um,
we're,
yeah,
we're all a work in progress in that regard. Yeah.
yeah. So that one came out 4 years ago. I wrote it pretty fast because we were not going anywhere. Like my weekends were writing, not going to hang out with
Yeah.
friends. Right? So, yeah. And that one came about differently. I actually had a publisher approach me,
Mm.
and based on the work that I was doing, I published some research and stuff. So that really fell in my lap in a really unexpected way. I feel so lucky because it had been a lifelong dream to write and publish, and I just had never started. So I started, and that happened. And that advice about building a platform, nobody really brought it to me.
Yeah.
So I put this book, I put another book, and they sold really well. And I think that that goal is so fulfilling because, like you said, there's only so many people you can see. In this office, I've got a limited number of hours, and there's so much need. And I wish, like just like you, that I could read. And so knowing that like tens of thousands of people have read this book and found because they're self-help books, which
Right. Yeah.
it's not necessarily the same as therapy. It's definitely not psychoanalysis. It's not
Right.
a
Right.
relationship you can build, but it's
Right.
not
Yeah.
nothing. There's a lot you can do through reading through a book and getting those tips
Mm.
or those help or journal prompts or and they have a lot of exercises and stuff in these too that I try to bring
Mhm.
some of what I do in the office into a home-based place. So it's, it's not a $200 therapy session, but it's a $20 book or $15 book. Like that can
Yeah.
go a long way.
Yeah.
Um, and try to like really extend mental health into places where it might not be, because it is unfortunately such a matter of privilege and access for so many people. There are a lot of people,
Yeah.
especially like teenagers, who can't access therapy. Their parents won't bring them.
Right.
They don't
Right.
find them.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
that's a really fulfilling thing, to be able to maybe in some ways break those barriers. So my
Nice.
Substack came late. Unfortunately, I started it about almost a year and a half ago. Um,
Okay.
so I wish I had started it 4 years ago, but I don't think I even heard Substack back then.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I'm trying to shape my writings a little bit around the themes of my next book, um, which is still shopping for a publisher for that one, because the publisher I was working for before has merged with another one, and bizarre industry stuff. Um,
Okay.
and this book is about belonging, a problem that I think really a lot of people can relate to, that sense of not belonging. And how do you find that sense of belonging in the world, whether that's a result of trauma or family of origin stuff, or moving through the world in different, minority status, as a person who's neurodivergent, a person who is, darker skinned, a person who's LGBT, or whatever the forces are in the world that shape us to not feel like we belong,
Yeah.
when really like we do. Like we all have such a
Yeah.
precious, important place in this world. And so that's the focus of that one. And so my Substack is just, although I thought of retitling it, but currently it's just called Mental Health Musings. So it's kind of mental health around that theme, or around sometimes current events tied into how that might relate to that theme or to our mental health. I just kind of see where the week takes me. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No. Nice. Nice. Nice.
yeah.
Well, that sounds like a very important book. The one we're in the process of. That's nice. Yeah, I've started my second book, but I've been told to go easy and get the first one out first. Yeah.
Oh, sometimes where you're
Yeah.
still shopping for its home, you want to keep going,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you more about the theme of that book, about like the wellness equation, about like what are some of these concrete building blocks that we can share with our listeners today, that they can do to maybe build the resilience, foster greater mental health. What do you see as being some of the most important building blocks for mental health?
Well, I think one that I kind of focus on just kind of as a way to think about, well, what can I do kind of on a daily basis to kind
Hmm.
of help bring my well-being into existence, kind of within myself. And I've been trained kind of psychoanalytically, so as you're kind of dealing with the unconscious, you're dealing with kind of deep aspects of the mind. Um, but the more I did the work that I'm doing, I would have, my grad students, postdocs come in and they're not sleeping. They're staying up all night writing papers and, doing whatever you do in college and whatnot. And so I would kind of realize that their mind would kind of attach to certain anxieties, what made sense to me. And I could analyze them and all that kind of thing and help them understand why their mind is doing what it's doing. Um, but eventually there was one or two patients who I could see that they were kind of getting more and more stressed, more anxious. Um, and eventually I'm like, okay, well, they're not sleeping all that much. And so, you know, eventually kind of moved in my thinking to kind of lifestyle aspects, the kind of like the sleep, exercise, diet. I think that kind of helps anyone kind of feel kind of mentally, physically stable in various ways. And that if you can kind of get that down, and then if you want to move to other places, say if you wanted to kind of connect with yourself, um, I don't know, in regard to spirituality, let's say, um, you almost need those kind of base ingredients, I think, of one's well-being to kind of live out other things that maybe at a higher quality of living.
Hmm.
So kind of one of the bases, kind of sleep, exercise, diet. Um, I'm not probably biased, and I think kind of needing a space to kind of work out. How do you kind of stay in tune, with yourself? I got my own therapist at this point that I go see as part of that. But I also kind of think about kind of a holding space. I talk about that in some of my writings about how do you have a space to go into to kind of work out what your well-being might consist of. How do you think about it? How do you talk about it? Maybe with loved ones. Um, So I think kind of sleep, exercise, diet, kind of a holding space. I like to have someone who I can bounce some ideas off of, kind of a little bit like we're doing here. I think this is kind of a part of it, the conversation about how to go about thinking about living life in various ways, how to connect with other people. I think relationships, right? You look at the literature, scientific literature, it's like, kind of warm, connected relationships at the top of the list is what it kind of shows.
For sure.
So I think about, well, how do I kind of connect with my family, my loved ones as part of that on a regular basis.
Hmm.
For me, I think that somatic piece, kind of the breathing, lowering my anxiety, the stress levels. Um, I used to see patients all the time, and kind of the more I do the work, it's almost like the less I see people. Right? It's like I want to kind of decompress, think in kind of a certain kind of way, so that I can kind of give back and feel good about myself in relation to kind of what I do for a living. So I've taken breaks, middle of the day, go hiking every day, in nature. So that's some of my thinking about what well-being consists of and how to go about it to some degree. But I get it. It's kind of what I said. It's like, your well-being equation is it's like your fingerprint. I mean, it's different for everybody. And so I can say kind of like, well, this is what I think, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's fine. But how do you live it out? I mean, that's can be very different, obviously. So anyway, I'd be curious just to kind of hear your thinking about, what goes into your ways of living out your kind of mental, physical health, so to speak.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, the research does like these are foundational building blocks for mental health, and we can build upon that. And how we live it out is going to change based on our ability, where we live, our aspects of privilege, our schedules. And yet we can't get away from it. Like we can't excuse and say
Yeah,
like, well, I have to be like I can't. That doesn't apply to. We've got to find ways to work toward at least the ideal of like when we talk about sleep, we're talking about 7 to 9 hours, not six,
yeah,
consistently. And
yeah,
a lot of people say, well, like, I don't need that. But the number of people who say that, it's really amusing because you can't all be the exception. And our
right,
brain need rest. It's when
right,
when we're in deep sleep, when we're in REM sleep, that's when we process through the stresses of the day. And if we don't allow ourselves that opportunity, we remain more anxious and we're
yeah,
more likely to be anxious. And it's interesting when you're talking about kind of the connection between these well-being building blocks and the
mm,
psychoanalysis part of it. Because
yeah,
when we become more prone to depression because we're not nourishing ourselves
yeah,
through good nutrition, through appropriate sleep, through movement and exercise, our brains become more predisposed to going
yes,
down these negative neural pathways.
bingo,
We're more
yeah,
likely to grab onto the
yeah,
negative interpretation of a benign event or a neutral event
yeah,
than a more positive interpretation. And then it makes sense to us. We're such
yeah.
logical creatures that we will make it make sense, but not backing off to think like, am I actually coming from not a fully well place? And so if we are coming from that really good baseline, we're less likely to go down that path.
No, it's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, yeah, like I can kind of interpret, help someone understand in some regards, what their mind is doing and why it's going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And they might go down the rabbit hole and connect up with childhood trauma,
Hmm.
right? But let's say growing up in the midst of a chaotic household, you know, maybe you didn't get as much sleep,
Mm.
right? Like in a sense, maybe kind of the rest, that we all kind of need to feel healthy. Maybe in some ways you didn't get access to that, or it wasn't allowed, or in various
Or like
ways.
the values
So
of like hustle culture or priorities or
yeah, and so you
right,
could be
laziness.
living out. You could be living out, kind of a aspect of repetition in some regard, and not fully understand how it might be connected to ways of kind of living, growing up.
Yeah.
Um, but if you want to kind of mentally digest, say, aspects of depression,
Hmm.
I get you need certain things in place because what we're talking about is, to not get those things is going to cause more anxiety, more depression. Um, and then how do you contend with that? And so I do think, kind of biases, I'm sure we are, I think we need a space to step back from ourselves and kind of think about, what's going on and how we're living and how to think about why we're living that way. And then, are there other ways we might consider living things out differently. So in a sense that we might kind of decide, hey, we're not going to go down a certain rabbit hole today. And what would we need to not do that?
Yeah. And so
Right.
our first automatic thoughts too are that, you know, the attributions of rejection or attributions of judgment, that we, that these negative valences we put on things when we're in a more depressive spot. So
Right.
I think, when we talk about well-being, the well-being equation, and um, a lot of times we hear kind of almost like this Gnostic separation of body and mind, right? Like
Yes. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
exist in my head, but like
Absolutely. Yeah.
you see this, like it's connected. The head and the
Right.
body is
Right.
all one part. Like our
Right.
brain is our
Right.
body. And we can kind of
Yeah.
forget that. And so when you're talking about nutrition too, it's not about like the shape of your body. It's about like this is why I always like with my son, I'm like, have you hydrated your brain? Is what I'll say to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
drinking
Yeah.
up water, like mom,
Yeah. Yeah.
are you nourishing your brain as
Yeah.
part of your body? Are you
Yeah.
eating well, like that well balance of nutrients, of proteins, complex carbohydrates, vegetables with all the vitamins? Like it's not just about your physical health. It's all connected. And these are some of the building blocks too to build your resilience, to fight against depression.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's a nice way to help someone think about, hey, there are additional elements that you know you may or may not be doing, but
Mhm.
the mind body connection, particularly kind of my training and kind of psychoanalysis. I mean, you can find analysts who talk about kind of the mind body connection, but historically that's there was a divide,
Yeah.
um,
I think they go back
and so
actually further than psychoanalysis, like all the way back to like ancient spirituality with this whole
mhm,
Gnostic idea of like
mhm.
there's a spiritual world and a physical world, and our brain was kind of the spiritual world, like our emotions were
Yeah.
but we're not. We're so integrated.
Yeah, and kind of like the mind, was going to prioritize or put kind of somewhere as if that's kind of what we're after. Um, and for me to come back to the pandemic, it wasn't until the pandemic that I used to take an hour break, and I
Mm,
would go get something to eat, take a quick nap, have some coffee, and then go back to work. Which nice to have the time to be able to do that, no question. But then I'm kinda like, "Okay, but I need kind of something a little more with the exercise and whatnot to kind of deal with the kind of the increase in anxiety." And I kinda thought, "Well, alright, so I'm gonna give up some money, but I'm gonna get back some kind of
mhm,
focus on the body." And
mhm.
and so it was almost like, well, what's the cost of living without the exercise in the middle
Yeah.
of the day? And then kind of like, well, what does it give me if I take the break? So it
Mhm,
was just kind of like a way to kind of think about the kind of the how I go about my living in a certain way, and what are the costs of certain ways of going about. How about you go about your day to day living? Kind of like teaching your son about how to think about certain things that you put into your body, and
mhm.
how to live that out.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exercise, that's another really powerful building block, you mentioned there. You talk about the pandemic, I remember, there was times I went jogging twice a day because just to get that anxiety out, because one of the things it does so, it like, when we move, when we're physically active, it produces in our brain a lot of these neurochemicals and neurotransmitters that we're seeking out, and sometimes through medication, but it naturally
Right.
produces them with no side effects. The only side effects are positive ones. So, like, the serotonin, the dopamine, the
Yep.
norepinephrine, endocannabinoids, which if like cannabinoids, if I'm familiar with that word, like that's natural,
Yeah.
and adrenaline, and so all of those have different aspects of positive feelings, right? Happiness, stress reduction, pain
Right.
reduction, and we can really naturally produce those when we move. And I know this is like, if you're not an exerciser, this isn't really attractive. And you're like, can we skip to the next part? And I definitely was there for a long time, but there was a time where I was really depressed and I knew these things. Like I knew exercise would help. And I remember I would get dressed in like jogging clothes in the morning so that I didn't have to change back into it later. And I dropped my son off at school and I'd come home and I would just want to sit on the couch and like curl up in a blanket and have my tea or whatever. And I would say to myself, do you want to like be uncomfortable for 20 minutes or do you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
thankful or depressed all day? And I would
Yeah.
force myself out the door. And after, months and months, it became something I was like, neutral about at least and hate it.
Yeah.
And now it's something I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't skip 3 times a week. Like I'm not skipping my run because I know what it does for my brain. And I'm not willing to give up something that takes care of my mental well-being.
No, no question. I think of it like a daily. I think of exercise, movement like a daily antidepressant.
Yeah, that's my med. That's my med. I'm not giving it up.
Right? Exactly. It's something I think kind of we all need in various ways, or we get kind of sluggish, lethargic. Yeah, I could probably get through my day in certain regards, but the longer you kind of go without it, I mean, I think most people aren't able to kind of connect up, with certain aspects of a type of living that most people prefer. And so, yeah, so I can get that. Yeah, I can get it in 20 minutes.
Mhm,
Right. Yeah, and I get the twice a day. Like I might need something towards the end of the day, but
mhm.
but if I get the cardio, with the sweat, right, the feel good chemicals that you mentioned, it'll last you 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
The other thing too, which is interesting in terms of if you break a sweat, go get that kind of cardio, and you don't get the 3, 4, 5 hours of kind of endorphins and feeling a little better. So sometimes it's kind of an indication that hey, something else might be going on
Mhm,
physiologically.
mhm,
I had a gut condition a couple of years ago. I
mhm,
didn't know what it was, and I saw all kind of doctors, took all kinds of medication, and it was just kind of like I had enough energy to do what we're doing, get
mhm,
home and go to sleep, take naps in between sessions and whatnot. And I would go exercise, um, and it wouldn't give me that kind of 4 or 5 hours of feeling kind of better. And so, kind of, I use it kind of as a guidepost in terms of, all right, well, but there's something else going on that I need to
mhm,
kind of figure out. It manifested as a depression,
mhm.
right? I could feel bad about certain things or have negative thoughts about myself or other people, and they would feel real to me, and I would kind of interact with those things. Um, but it wasn't until I kind of cleared up my gut condition that then I could kind of use the exercise for what I find that it's helpful for.
Yeah.
And so all these things, and I think the mind body again, it is, and that's what they're kind of showing with gut conditions, right? If you got a gut condition,
Absolutely.
they're linking it to kind of Alzheimer's, various forms of depression, and so yeah, that's kind of what the science is showing. It's like yeah, it's all one,
Yeah, like they say, the majority of our serotonin is made in our gut. Like the gut microbiome is
right?
so powerful, so connected to our brain, that it's a really important place to start. Whether that's and I don't know if it's our place to give out nutritional guidance, but like I personally, use
Yeah,
probiotics to try to keep
I
that
know.
powerful
Right. No,
metabolism.
prebiotics, probiotics. I take those
Yeah,
every day. Yeah,
yeah.
whether it's my place or not, yeah, I don't know. but
That's what it works
the
for me. So
literature, yeah, the literature's out there. I just kind of
it
point
is.
to the science of
Yeah.
it. Absolutely. And before, when I first started, like I wouldn't dreamed of kind of thinking about that or even talking to anybody about that as far as their mental well being. That
Right.
wasn't how I was trained,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Uh,
So, we grow as people are.
Thankfully, I was gonna say, yeah, sure, the slow and the hard way, but thankfully, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And one other thing you mentioned earlier that I wanted to really come back and highlight is the importance of social connection as a
yeah,
building block of mental health and resilience. And it's interesting too how that intersects with depression because not having a good connected social life can
yeah.
cause depression for sure.
Mhm,
And also
mhm.
depression can keep us from connecting with our social circles because we start to think
Right.
like, well, maybe they don't really care about me or I'll just wait and see if they contact me. That's a common, mental
Yeah,
trap.
yeah.
Or, I don't really matter. Like we can tell ourselves all these stories
Oh,
that
yeah,
make,
like, I'm not good enough because someone's not reaching out to me.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right, right.
And then we get very like me centric interpretations of which can
Mhm,
be very
mhm.
complicated world that we live in. But but really proactively, intentionally cultivating some social connections is foundational to mental health. Like, and there's a lot of research that talks about the epidemics of loneliness, and I know even like the UK has a minister of loneliness now, which I love.
Right,
To
right.
address that, and that can be a real problem, especially with older people, because your social circles can start to diminish as you age. But no matter where
Sucks.
Are you having a
Mm.
text?
Well, I just saw someone, I didn't see someone wrote a question about being depressed or something like that,
Oh,
and I
that's
didn't
good.
quite, yeah, and I didn't catch it. So if someone could type that again,
Yeah,
but
for
keep
sure.
going. No, I
I
just,
will. But yeah, I do want to address the person's question. So
yeah.
not to my thing. Um,
Well, and to kind of piggyback off that social component, and no question,
mhm,
how important it is. But I think it's also another kind of indicator you can kind of use about your, mental well-being, health and wellness, or however you look at it. That if you kind of go out and kind of socialize to some degree with some individuals that historically generally work for you, you feel kind of safe and trusted in various ways, and there are times when people can go out and do that, and it doesn't give back to them in the way that the literature is talking about.
mm,
Right? It's supposed to,
mhm,
but it doesn't at points, and it used to. And so part of what I kind of help people is look at, well, let's look at the various kind of reasons in terms of why that might not be translating internally in regard to an experience that feels good.
yeah,
Particularly if it's individuals who you were close to, previously,
mhm,
and you kind of reach out to them and interact in various ways. And if it doesn't give back to you in various ways, all right, so if something else is kind of going on, say areas of depression and whatnot.
yeah. There might be something
Yeah,
to talk with a therapist or explore some things going on
right,
physiologically.
right, yeah, yeah, right, right, yeah. Because if there's some kind of a physiological difficulty going on, and you
Mhm.
don't know what it is, you could
Yeah,
go out and socialize it and feel worse about yourself because it's not you're not connecting up with something that you want that you've been capable of. Yeah, and if you don't know it, so that's one of the things I do with certain individuals. Like, all right, go get a hold of your primary care physician. Go get some blood
yeah.
work.
That's
Let's
always
just
a
go
good
look
place
at your
to start.
yeah. Let's
Mhm.
go look at your B levels. Let's look at your D
Yeah,
levels.
yeah.
Right.
What do you see?
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah, and then
what
trust
if
your body.
people are so depressed they can't get out of bed? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, there's a good one.
You want to start?
Um, yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose in that regard, if I'm so depressed that I can't get out of bed, eventually I think I would, get some blood work done. Just, I want to see if there's just something physiologically going on that's keeping me um, in bed. I think in certain kind of ways, I'm willing to make a bargain with myself, right? I'm like, so you need to, for me, it's my own thinking in terms of what I've been through, in terms of when I don't want to get out of bed, right? Um, I will make a bargain with myself in terms of, all right, look, if you go to the gym, you can come back and take a nap. And if you don't get up out of bed, I don't love it, but it's better than kind of not going to the gym and not doing some of the things that might be helpful. And then I make a bargain. I'm like, okay, well, just you don't feel like going to the gym. It's like, yeah, you don't. I'm like, well, get into the shower. I'm like, I'm going to get into the shower to go to the gym, to come home from the gym to take another shower. I'm like, yeah, you need just something to kind of help feel good for just a moment or two to help you get out the door. I think another thing I would do, I would probably have one or two friends. I'm not going to have many, but I mean, as far as who I would get a hold of and just say, hey, could we just go for a walk to the park? Could we meet up, for lunch? Like I'm willing to at least try to go out and do a few things and then come back inside because in some ways, if we're inside too long sitting around, we get a little too lethargic,
Mhm.
right? It's not good for us chemically. And so, it might be points where I'm like, look, I'm willing to get into my car. I'm willing to drive to a park. I'm willing to get out of my car and sit on the park bench and read, a novel for pleasure for 20, 30 minutes,
Get some
you know,
vitamin.
and yeah, get some vitamin D exactly from the sun and go buy a salad or something like that, something healthy, and then go back home again. So it's
I think
just
it's
like,
so
I want to
important
try
to like,
some things. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I think it's really important to start where you're at and have
Yeah.
compassion for yourself. Like we were talking kind of about ideals, and it's easy to incorporate new things when you're like, "Oh, I'm just like a little blue or like a little anxious." But you know, sometimes you're really depressed. You don't have a job. You're not talking to anybody. It's hard to get out of bed. And like with compassion, starting where you are, what's one thing you can do to move yourself a little forward, to push yourself a bit out of that comfort zone um, to do a little something for your mental well-being. So if that means like you're not going to, it's aspirational to think of driving somewhere and going for a hike. Don't worry about it. Like it doesn't have to be all or nothing. But what can you do that's more than you're doing now that could be loving to yourself? So if that means, getting dressed today and cleaning off the dishes from the counter so you feel like you've done something, then do it and applaud yourself for it. And if that means like going out and shoveling the snow if that's where you live, or just walking around your block and be like, I moved, I did it. And pat yourself on the back and
Mhm.
celebrate the win. You don't have to have built up a sweat. You don't have to have gone 3 kilometers or 5 miles or whatever. Celebrate the win. Push yourself a little bit and do it with love for yourself. Not you're such a loser or whatever negative self-talk it is. Like you're such a you don't do enough. Like I did the thing. I did the thing because I deserve it, because I want to feel better, because I love myself enough to do the hard things so that I'll start to feel better. Whatever that is. If you know that your diet is kind of a mess because you're just kind of
Mhm.
comfort fooding, make one small change, whether it's one day a week or it's one meal a day where you're like, I'm going to choose something that I think is going to be better for me versus in the immediate moment. Just find that one thing and then you can build on that, building blocks to mental health.
No, that's nice. No question. Because you got to start kind of where you can.
Yeah.
I
Otherwise,
also along with,
another thing.
yeah. Well, you're not going to do it, right? I mean, I think that's the other thing too, in terms of, I try to help people figure out, say with the exercise, right? I mean, it's like, well, hey, let's just start with something you think you might like,
Mhm.
and then I have people at points who they tell me, well, I can't find anything. I'm like, all right, well, let's figure out what you hate the least then.
Yes. Yeah. It
It's kind
doesn't,
of like, got to start somewhere,
yeah.
and
It doesn't
then
have
it's
to
kind
be
of
a
like,
gym. Like it doesn't have to be
no,
built weights or running. Like that's something that
no,
has worked for me. It has to be something that works for you. So maybe it's dance, maybe it's yoga. I love doing
right.
yoga too. It's amazing for mental health and for trauma, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah.
but it's something that maybe you can do without hating it, or maybe even finding a bit of joy in. I like to talk
Yeah.
about movement more than exercise. Like
Well,
the idea of
yeah,
moving.
absolutely right. I do, and I do think I kind of think with the, like say with the walking or whatnot. I'm like, oh, well, hey, it's good for your heart. Just and start there. I probably am a little biased. I want that serotonin and dopamine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want
No,
that to dump into my system too. But
yeah.
yeah, I think movement is like, yeah, start where you can. I mean,
Yeah, and
it's
like
just like,
typically,
hey,
like not everybody's capable of running. So start where you
yeah,
can, and maybe not even
exactly.
people
Right,
walking.
right.
But
If you're,
yeah,
man, yes. If you're not capable of running, well, it's like, well, maybe you can kind of do a slow hike. Maybe you
mhm,
can. Maybe it's walking around your block.
mhm,
Go to the gym and walk on the treadmill. I don't care exactly, but I do think movement, stretching, qigong is just, you know, and if the other thing too is, I suppose if I wasn't getting out of my house. At least I want to get out of my bed. So get out of my bed and go to the couch, and I might be willing to then figure out how to put some meditation music on and meditate for 15 or 20 minutes, so that I'm not having to move a ton, but I'm kind of focused, getting my mind, in regard to something that is healthy for us, right?
yeah,
With that mind body connection. And I don't think I think if I could pair two things together, right? If I was getting out of bed, if I was getting out of the house, what I mean? I think kind of like a slow jog, 15, 20 minutes. Come home, take a shower, 15, 20 minutes, quick meditation. Like almost like a kind of a half hour bang for the buck. If I needed kind of the up and a down and a balance, and I needed to do it quick and efficiently,
mm.
that's probably how I would do it. Man, I
The
got
other
I got
thing
a
I would,
I got a treadmill in my house. The other thing too is, got a treadmill in my house. I have a hiking, you know, 5-minute walk from my house where I can hike. I have a gym membership. It just I've set it up to where it's just like you don't have a choice. It's like
no excuses. You've got access.
right. And it's like, because I've had periods in my life where I went long periods kind of without exercising, or kind of eating unhealthy, not getting the sleep. And so I would work on one or the others, in various ways. But it wasn't until I kind of put them together in a 24-hour period, I'm like, oh, okay, then I got to repeat it. right?
Sounds like you
That
have a
film
lovely
of,
setting there. And I think we need to recognize too that some people don't have the same access or privilege. You know, you like even just as a
absolutely, yeah,
female,
yeah,
like jogging alone doesn't always feel safe to
yes,
me. I mean, I'm
yeah,
jogging with pepper
bingo,
spray.
yeah, right,
There's neighborhoods
yeah,
where I wouldn't even do that, you know, and so like recognizing what do you have,
yeah,
but what can you do within your limitations so that they don't become rule outs or excuses? Can you put on a video? Like there's so much on YouTube that
yeah,
you can follow along to, or um, like, can you sit in your back patio if you just need to get into the sunshine? Because that I find very, very uplifting, just to be in sunshine, absorbing the natural vitamin D. If it's sunny where you are, maybe it's not. I also grew up in BC where it's
yeah.
raining all the time, so
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
you know,
No,
um,
I grew up in
but
Michigan,
having enough
and
work.
and I was say, speaking of not having the sun, right? I grew up in Michigan
Yeah,
where it can be cloudy almost like the
mhm.
whole winter. It's
Yeah, I can
cold,
really get
dark.
that.
It's just difficult, and so kind of, I need that movement for the serotonin, dopamine, and I probably got to drink a little bit of vitamin D from the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Anyways,
And some people
yeah.
buy light boxes even to simulate the
Oh yeah,
light
yeah,
from natural
bingo. Yeah,
sunlight.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
really
yeah.
dark.
I have one of those. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I try a lot of different. I think that's the thing too. As far as try a lot of different things. Kind of be open to what kind of scientifically is proven to work. Some of it will work for you. Some of it won't. Right. I mean,
The
I've
bottom
talked
line is
to
don't give up on yourself, right? Like you said, keep
yeah,
experimenting because you're worth it and your mental health is worth fighting for. It doesn't come
yeah.
from
No, no question. And so I think there's a piece where I want to kind of help people think about themselves in terms of who they were when they were growing up, in terms of what may have worked and why they moved there. And so if they're
Yeah,
not, using some of that, let's try some of that. But I also get, every 10 years, it's kind of a new decade. And so in some ways, we might need some different things that we haven't tried for our health and wellness. Yeah.
right.
So try different things that maybe you haven't.
Yeah.
Right.
Find joy in the experimentation.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's for me kind of with the whole Substack experience. I think that's kind of what has been interesting, right? For me with the writing, we come back to it. It has produced kind of like this excitement, but there's
Mhm.
this trepidation,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, I think historically it's like, okay, I don't want to kind of put myself out there. So it's like kind
Mhm.
of back away from that. I know how to do what I do for a living. I could do it in my sleep. You know what I mean? I joke with my buddies. I'm like, it's like the only thing that I probably do really well is what we do for a living. You know, but now it's just like, okay, but if you want a book out there, you got to put yourself out there. And so it's kind of a combination of kind of excited to do that, but I'm nervous and anxious about it. But I've kind of noticed that if you kind of want things in a certain way that you've not done before in a certain regard, well, you got to balance. It comes with some trepidation and excitement, anxiety. And I've learned that that's okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I
Like
don't have
to
to have it all
feel that
figured
inside and
out.
move through it anyways. And I think that like another place that might apply to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to improve their mental health is like we talked about the importance of social community or having social connections. And sometimes people say, yeah, well,
Yeah,
what do you do if I don't have any? And that's where, like, sometimes moving through the fear of putting yourself out there can come into play. Like, what's a hobby that maybe you've never tried, or maybe you have that you might just want to,
right. Yeah,
take a class somewhere, or maybe you combine it with exercise and you join, a yoga studio or a dance studio or a workout group, or maybe you take ceramics, or what could be something that might be
right,
fun for you, or other people might be, and you might feel anxious about small talk, but
right.
pushing through that, like you said, because if you want something like your book goal, or you want
Yeah.
something like social connection, it's worth it to move
Hmm,
through,
hmm.
acknowledge the anxiety with, again, that self-compassion I talked about before. Like, I feel anxious and it's okay. You're going to be okay and move through it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But like today, it's like, it's my first live. I'm like, I don't know how to do it. Am I going to be able to push the right buttons? Get on? Like, how's it going to go? And I'm like, it's all right. Man, it'll go how it goes. You know what I mean? Yeah, and
I got
that's be
this with
okay.
you. Come on,
Right,
let's do
right,
this.
right, right.
And I'm glad we did. I think it's been really
Yeah,
lovely to connect. And I see
no
there's
question. No, I
typically
appreciate
people
it.
listening in. So I hope this has been really valuable to all our
Oh,
listeners.
absolutely. I mean, I like you. As I mentioned, and I kind of direct message you at some point. I said, I saw you at some point. I just get on Substack. There's lives going on all the time. And I pull it up. I'm like, oh, hey, there's Deborah. How nice. It's pretty cool. And I'm like, I'm not ready to do that on my own. So when you kind of reach out and said, hey, would you want to do it something together? At first, I was like, maybe later, and then you came back to it. I'm like, all right, I appreciate, so I appreciate you reaching out. You know what I mean?
Well,
Yeah.
I
It's
think
like,
you
I
have
don't,
something
I
so
don't think I would,
valuable to offer.
at some point I might do one of these on my own, but I don't think, now the first time I'm like, I appreciate kind of the support and the connection.
Yeah. Well, I think I like talking with you. I think it's more fun than just talking to myself and to all the appreciated lurkers out
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
But
Y- No,
yeah,
I appreciate everyone showing up here
yeah,
too.
you're giving like
Man,
your time is so valuable. So I
yeah,
feel
no
like you're
question. Yeah, time's valuable. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And it's still the middle of the workday,
Um,
even where you are. So
yeah. I'm getting towards the end of it in various ways. Yeah, I know. So maybe I don't know. But before we stop, I don't know if there's anyone else has a question or two, or.
if you do, please type it in, and we'd love to
Yeah,
answer.
type it in. Yes, sorry. Yeah, type it in to get another question or two. Um, I appreciate Dr. Chambers had asked that question. By the way,
Mhm. Mm.
uh,
So again, just while
uh,
we're waiting for some more questions to pop up, Dr. Bronce Rice writes the Wellbeing Equation on Substack, and I'm Dr. Deborah Vinall, and I'm writing Mental Health Musings. And we'd
yeah,
love to have you join us if you aren't there already, and if you are reading and following along, we appreciate you so much.
yeah, absolutely. Hey, if you have questions of us, didn't want to ask them here, ask them, direct messages and whatnot, and yeah.
Yes, you're not seeing anything else pop up. I didn't see the other questions, so
I didn't either. So
okay. All right. Well, I think maybe
hey,
this is a good place to
Rich,
wrap it.
thank you,
We
thank you,
hit like an
Rich.
exact session length, which I think is just like a built-in feeling, right? As a therapist, after a while, like 50 minutes,
Yeah.
we're done.
Yeah, the 15-minute hour. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the clock. I'm like, it's
Physiologically, it's what
exactly
I'm used to. Psychologically, it's like, hey, no more.
it's a wrap. Anyways, thank you everybody for joining us.
All
Thank
right.
you, Dr. Bronze, for joining me, and we'll see you all on Substack.
All right. Thank you. Good. All right.
And I have to turn this off. Oh, there we go.